see that okay? Do we need to turn off some more lights? I'm going to take the no answer as we're good. Okay. So as you know, my name is Ann Gafford. I am the Scott County Ag Agent here, and I'm going to be talking about just some garden basics with you today. So we're going to talk about the different methods and styles, when to plant, cool season and warm season crops. First, we're going to start with methods and styles. I would recommend planning out your garden at least 6 months in advance because it can take some time, and plants do need a lot of space to grow. So different plants have different spacing requirements, and planning out your garden will help make sure that those plants have that space so that they can have airflow and sufficient sunlight so that they can grow and not compete with each other. The other thing is selecting the site itself. So it's best to have full sun, which is a minimum of 7 to 8 hours a day. That helps to kind of have the fruit have a good production with the plants. But if you only have partial sunlight, I would suggest just doing leafy vegetables because they don't need as much sunlight as, say, like peppers do. Okay? First, we're going to talk about the in-ground gardens. So there's going to be some pros and some negatives with them. Pro, they're a lot cheaper than, per se, a raised bed. They also provide more square footage, so if you have a lot of land, you can do it a lot bigger than just a raised bed. Raised bed is normally by a 4x8, but an in-ground garden, you can make it as big or as small as you want it to be. And it's also popular, popular among the larger scale growers, like I said before, just because they can make it as big or as small as they want it. Some of the negatives could be the soil characteristics. I know around here that we have clay soil, so it can be pretty hard to grow that sometimes. And if it's compact, then it's really hard to have a good drainage with it. Another thing can be what the previous site activity was. So if you had a lot of heavy machinery on it, then it's going to compact it, and like I said before, have poor drainage. Another thing would be soil fertility. If you don't have a lot of nutrition in your soil, then you're going to struggle to have your plants grow. So it's a lot more maintenance to keep up with than, per se, a raised bed. There's also tillage, which is another cost factor in it because you'll have to buy a tiller. Like I said, you have to kind of keep up that nutrition with the soil, and you'll have to do frequent soil tests. Slope, you want to have a decent slope so that there's not just water sitting with your plants because your plants just don't like to sit in water. Another thing would be pests. Pests are a lot more likely to come up through the ground with the in-ground gardens than, per se, the raised bed gardens. All right. Next would be raised bed gardens. So they are great for areas with poor soil quality, like I said before. They take up less space. So I know for me, I'm a renter and I don't have much room to put a garden in. So a raised bed would be a good option for me, or just anybody that doesn't have much land themselves. It can also help reduce weeds and pests because it's up off the ground and pests have to put a little bit more work in to get to it. And then also prevents water runoff because it's staying in that one centralized location. It can give you higher yields because it has that soil fertility that kind of sticks around, unlike with the in-ground. But one negative thing is it can be pretty expensive to set them up. Like I said, the size is normally about 4x8 with the raised beds, but they work best with like smaller scale, so kind of more what we would do. But the larger scale guys, they would have to put a lot more work in, and it would cost a lot on the front end for them to do something like that. All right. So some of the building materials that you can use would be untreated wood, but if you use untreated wood, I would recommend painting it to help keep it from decaying. You can also use treated wood as well. If you want to use shallow beds, you can actually use the landscape timbers. I don't know how well you can see it, but that picture right there. And then there's also concrete bed, like the concrete block beds right here. You can just do one concrete block or two. It just depends on how deep those roots need to dig into. So if you have kind of the cool season crops, they don't need as much room, but the warm season crops, they dig in more to the soil and those roots need more space. And then there's also plastic tubs and different things like that. I know recently I've seen on Facebook Marketplace, they're offering black tubs like that for 20 bucks. So that's not too bad of a cost. And then we have container gardens, which are really cute and normally super portable. For plastic ones, they hold water pretty well, so there's less evaporation. The lighter colors can help keep it cooler, and darker colors can help increase the temperature. So for cool crops, you can do the lighter color, and for warm season crops, then you can do the darker color. And then for wood, it's really good at insulating against the temperature swings. So say if you planted a cool weather crop, kind of in between where it's starting to get pretty warm, that would be a good thing to have because it would help with the temperature and help to keep it more regular for that cool weather crop. They can be harder to clean though since, as you know, wood is porous, and they are pretty heavy to transport. So once you put them down, they're there to stay for the most part. The other things would be terracotta pots, which they dry out a lot quicker than the plastic ones do. One thing about terracotta pots though is you get a lot more aeration than say a plastic pot. They can be difficult to clean, kind of like how wood is. They're very porous and it'll soak in. Other materials can be metal. I know growing up, my dad would always have big metal troughs and he would do raised garden beds that way. They work super well, but you have to be careful because they can get really hot. Another thing would be fabric. They have great aeration, but it can stay pretty wet, so you want to be careful with those. You can even do a tire, a toilet, a bathtub, whatever you want to do. It's up to you. And then some of the reasons that container gardens are really, really good is because, like I said before, with in-ground gardens, sometimes you can't use that soil. If there's a whole bunch of clay, then there's not much you can do about it. No lawn side, no lawn at all, like I said before. I'm a renter, I don't have room for anything, and I'm not allowed to put anything in. So a container bed or a raised bed is a great option for me because I can remove it whenever I leave and I can take it with me. It's also great if you have physical limitations, like if you have back issues, hip issues, that way you're not having to bend down as far as the in-ground beds. Time constraints, there's a lot less time that goes into a raised bed or a container bed than an in-ground garden. In-ground gardens, like I said, you have to do frequent soil tests, you have to check for soil fertility, you have to till, it's just a lot more management. Another thing would be flexibility and portability. As you can see here with these pots, they're going to be pretty easy to move. Unlike an in-ground garden, you can't really lift that up and take that somewhere else. And if you do, I would really love to see you try. And then the other thing could just be preference. I think that these all look pretty cute together. Like the funky look of the terracotta with the plastic and everything else. I think it looks pretty cute. That's just me. And then there's the cool season and warm season crops. For cool season, they grow better during the cooler climates, obviously. They need the cooler climates to be able to grow and mature properly. They can withstand frost pretty well, a lot more so than the warm weather crops. And the best time to have them is between spring and fall. Well, not between, spring and fall. You don't want it during the summer. Don't listen to that. All right. So these are some of the cool season crops that we have that you can do. So that could be lettuce, spinach, mustard, carrots, different things like that. You got a whole bunch of options. And I think we have some of those back there that you already got. I helped bag some of the seeds earlier, so I knew a few of them. And then there is the warm season crops. So they require a warmer climate for their soil and for the air temperatures so that they can germinate, grow, and mature properly as well. They will definitely be killed by frost, so you have to be super careful whenever you plant them. Wait until late spring or summer, so after the last frost date. I'll talk about the frost date here in a little bit. And then they, like I said before, they have deeper roots, so they're more drought resistant, but you'll have to have a deeper bed for them. And here are some of the warm season crops. We have beans, okra, peppers, tomatoes, watermelons, a few different things like that. And then here's some of the seeding times for the vegetable gardens. Doug's going to talk about it a little bit more, but I just wanted to bring it up. So for the spring planted cool season crops, that would be like the beets, broccoli, different things like that. That's when you would plant them, is in the earlier springtime. And then for the warm season crops, late spring, early summer, that would be the beans, the cucumbers, different things like that. And then after summer, closer to the end when it's starting to cool down a little bit, that's when you would then again plant the cool season crops so that you can get almost more bang for your buck, as you will. All right, so when to plant. UT Extension actually has a really awesome calendar that has every month it has recommendations for just about every day, things that you can do. Some days it will tell you to prepare the succession seeds. Some days it will tell you when to plant. But it's just a really awesome tool to have. And I actually have the link for it right there on the side. If you would like it, I can also email it to you. And then also, along with having the monthly calendar, it has monthly tips, tricks, and different vegetables that I've talked about every year.
Okay, can you read out the link, the site?
Yeah, it's also, I have papers back there printed of my presentation, so if anybody wants to grab it after, but I can still read it off if you would like. So it's https://EXTENSION period TENNESSEE period EDU / I'm just going to say publications / documents / W4S6.pdf.
Can you say it again?
I'll let you read it. Now, if you want me to after, I'll tell you. All right. So now we have our frost days. Here are some of the major cities in Tennessee. We have Knoxville and Clarksville, which are the closest to us. But since we are up higher than them, our frost date is normally a little bit later. So for Knoxville, it says April 22nd. Clarksville, it says April 27th. Generally for us, it's normally mid-May. I was looking earlier and it said roughly May 25th is the last time that it'll give approximately 10% chance of frost happening. So whenever you're wanting to put in your warm season crops, that's when I would put it in, is after the last frost day. And then for your planting, if you're planting seeds, I recommend doing a depth of 2 to 3 times the diameter. That's just how big around it is. That way it's not going too deep in the soil and it's less likely to come up. And then if you're doing your planting transplants, then I would recommend doing the depth of what the soil level is in your current container. Because if you go too deep, then it can cause that stem to rot. So however deep it is in that container that you get is how deep I recommend you putting it. And then here, you won't really see it on here, but you might be able to see it on those papers better. Like I said, I can send it to you if you would like. This just has like the different vegetables, varieties, growing intervals, the spacing requirements for them, how many you need to plant per 100 rows, different things like that. It also has the first days of harvest, length of harvest, and your total yield. So it's just great information to have. All right, next we have signs of harvest. So for snap beans, that is when the pod itself is smooth and tender. And then for lima beans, that is when the pod is full, but it's still green. For cucumbers, that is when the seeds are small, the flesh is firm, and it is green. For lettuce, that is when it is still tender, but before the seed stalk begins to form. For peas, that is after the pods have filled, but before they turn yellow. And then for summer squash, that would be when the large end of it is approximately 1 to 2 1/4 inches in diameter. Squash, that is when the leaves are crisp and dark green. Tomatoes is whenever they are fully colored but still firm. And then turnip greens is whenever the leaves are crisp and green. All right, and then whenever you are doing your crops and gardening, I do recommend, especially if you are going to have in-ground gardens, to rotate your crops, because that can help reduce pests and diseases, just to help moving it. But I would recommend doing it within the same family of the plant group. So for tomatoes, legumes, and carrots, they're all in the same family. So you can see you can rotate them. So in year 1, bed 1, tomatoes, bed 2, legumes, carrots, and then each year you kind of switch it out, because that helps to keep that soil fertile, so that you're not taking all the nutrition out, keeping that same crop in year to year. And then I'm going to have a whole bunch of information about different preparations and things that you can do based on the season and the month. So I know February just passed, but for February is normally whenever you are sowing seeds for transplant. You're doing it indoors. You're preparing your soil. You can do the soil sample test like we did. And you can sow the earlier seeds. So you can go ahead and be doing the cool weather seeds. March, continuing to sow those seed plants. Preparing the soil, so that's putting in whatever nutrients that soil needs, whether that be lime or manure, whatever it needs. That is the time where you can start doing your plant transplants. So for your cooler season crops, you can start getting those ready to put in, and then you can continue sowing the cool weather seeds. Okay, next. For springtime, April, that you can keep going with the cool weather seeds. You can purchase and keep getting those transplants, getting those high quality transplants ready to be able to put them in your garden. You can set up your stakes, your trellises, cages, row crops, different things like that. And then you can direct seed some of your warm weather crops, because if they're just seeds, then the frost isn't going to hurt them. It's whenever they start to develop and bloom that becomes an issue. So putting just the seeds in the ground at this time won't be an issue. For May is whenever you transplant the warm season crops, and then you can direct seed them as well. So you can put those transplants in or the seeds. And then for the late spring, early summer, you have late May, doing those transplants, watering and weeding, so just watering as needed and making sure that weeds are under control. Continued succession planting, so any crops you have from last year that you saved the seeds for, you can do that. Scouting, so making sure that the insect population is under control, and any diseases that you're catching, you're getting it early so that you can make sure that the problem is done before it gets too bad and you lose the majority of your crop. June is when you continue planting, and then you can harvest your cool season crops. You can keep scouting, looking for those weeds, water, pests, different things like that. And now would be the time when to use those protective sprays as needed. And then for the heart of summer, July, that would be picking the very last bit of your cool season crops and getting the very beginning of your warm season crops, planting for fall, so planning to start your cool season crops over again. Watering and weeding, as I said before, scouting, still looking for those insects and diseases, and you can seed all of your fall transplants. So you can go ahead and put them in. August is whenever you can pick, water, and weed again. Prepare your soil for fall, so depending on what type of plants that you have, what type of produce you're trying to get, it can vary what that soil needs. So for your summer, so for your warm season crops and for your winter season crops, it might be different what they need. So putting that nutrients in the soil, whatever they need. All right, and transplanting your fall crops. Late summer, early fall, so August and September, continue to water, continue to check for weeds, scouting for insects and diseases. That would be the time to start picking more of your warm weather crops, and canning and freezing. So that would be the time to start canning and freezing those warmer weather crops as well. And now would be a great time to start planting those seedy fall crops. So that would be like your spinach, different things like that. And then for fall time, October, that's whenever you harvest, kind of getting close to the last bit of your warm weather harvest. And the beginning of your fall crops, that's whenever you take the soil sample test for the next year to come up. That way, if there's something, I know for lime, it can take up to 6 months for it to be integrated in the soil. That will give it time before you start the garden up again for it to be integrated in. And then you can also sow your cover crops. November is when you can harvest your fall crops. Probably for one of the last times, but you're getting it in a lot later. And then the last would be to clean and prepare for the next coming year. And then for December, that's whenever you would harvest the last little bit of the cool weather crops that you have. Make sure that you're taking notes throughout all of it so you can compile all your notes together, so you can figure out what you did like, what you didn't like, what you thought you did really well, and what you thought you could improve on. Okay, well, I thought that I could plant these later and do better because I ended up losing half of my crop to frost. So I'm going to make a note so I can remember next year to check that frost date before I plant. The next thing could be checking your seeds. So if you are trying to save your seeds and use them for next year, that would be a great time to make sure that they're still doing good and making sure you're getting it all dried out and ready. And then December would be a great time to start looking for seeds if you are interested, because the earlier that you can look and the earlier you can get them, the best selection that you have. And then January, early February, continue to plan and select. That's whenever you would order your seeds and get them in, gather all the materials that you would need for the next year, and then sow the transplants for your cool weather crops. And then that is it. Any questions? All right.
No questions at all from you newbies? Here's one to answer.
Oh, so I'm sorry.
Frost.
The frost date. So the frost date for us is around March 20th, March 25th. It's almost a whole month later than Knoxville and Crossville. Even though we're only an hour from them, we're so much higher in elevation that it's about a month after them. And that frost date, that's, did I say May? What did I say? May. I'm so sorry. May. Everybody's going to blame me for killing everything. May. It's May. I'll write it down on my forehead if you need me to so you can see it. It's May.
Question.
Yes.
Do you have inserts with that same information?
We don't currently have an in-service, but I'm more than happy to give you this PowerPoint if you would like it. I don't know if you'd want to listen to me again, though.
Just research. Doing research.
Yeah, no, we don't currently have an in-service going, but probably here in the next few months, I'm going to try and have some sort of educational class for gardening, but I just started in November, so I'm still pretty new to it all, if you couldn't tell, but I'm getting it all figured out. All right, anybody else?
We have a question about when to plant tomatoes. No time soon.
Yeah.
No time soon. Just because it's
Out back there as well. So most of everything I'm going to be talking about. Can everybody hear me first off? Okay. I just wanted to go on record as saying I'm agreeing with everybody that says wait as long as you can to start mowing your lawn. Because once you get started, you know what that means. But anyway, I'm tasked this evening with talking to you about growing your onions. Did everybody get some of the onion plants in the back? Okay.
not yet when we trust this.
Okay. And planting potatoes. I'm probably the best one to do this because I've done it the wrong way, every wrong way that could possibly be done. I've done that in the past, so I've learned a lot from my mistakes. But I'm not saying I know what I'm doing yet, but I know a little bit about what not to do, so that's the way I'm going to approach this. So before I actually get started talking about what to do with these onion plants and why we're doing plants instead of those bulbs, I want to add a little bit to what Anna's presentation was about September and October, November, December, January, all that, because today I harvested a good peck of several different varieties of lettuce. I picked enough kale, enough mustard greens, enough spinach. I harvested some turnips. I harvested some carrots today to put in a salad that I had for a late lunch before I came down here. So you can do this stuff all through the winter. Back when we had the extreme cold weather in December, I was sweating it pretty good. But you know, my lettuce that was doing really good before that looked like that it was on its, you know, down for the count, so to speak. But if you could see my lettuce today, it's doing really well. So, and it's time to start planting some other lettuce. So just a little bit of modification to kind of help protect the plant during the extreme cold times will enable you to be able to grow a lot of these cool season crops all through the year. Last year, I harvested the last of my fall cabbage in about March of last year. So we can do a lot. I do have a high tunnel, but you don't have to grow it in a high tunnel. The stuff I'm talking about now was not grown in a high tunnel. Does anybody know what a high tunnel is?
No.
Okay, I thought that might be a question. A high tunnel, a lot of people would see it and think it's a greenhouse. But all it is a frame, a metal frame with plastic, so it's just protected agriculture. You have to water inside, you grow in the ground in a high tunnel, not in containers. You can grow in containers. The only thing that I have in my high tunnel growing was the carrots, but I planted those in a, has everybody seen those mineral tubs that the people that raise cattle feed their cattle protein mineral in the wintertime. I planted a couple of those mixed, potting mix and compost mixture to grow carrots in, and I'll show you a picture of the few carrots that I harvested today, but it's actually the first ones. The year before, they were doing a lot better because I planted my carrots the year before last in August. This time I didn't get to plant them until about the end of September, 1st of October. So they got a lot slower start. So they're just now really starting to take off and grow. But anyway, that has nothing to do with growing onions or potatoes. So let's talk about that. How many have grown onions before? Okay. How many have grown onions by planting the plants before? Okay. How many have only grown them by planting the bulbs? Okay. There is, what's the difference, you might say? There is a difference. When I was a lot younger, I know a lot of the farm supply stores and all would have mostly onion plants. But as of the last several years, you go and about all you can get are the bulbs. Okay? Is there a difference on what you can produce with plants versus bulbs? The answer is yes. Okay? The ones that planted, I mean, got the plants last year in the Grow Appalachia program. Let me see your hand. How did they do? Awful. Okay? Great. Awful, great, okay? Anything in between? Okay. And I really think that you can get those same results no matter if you plant plants or bulbs, ranging from awful to great. Okay, part of it is how you do it. So I want to tell you a little bit about how to do it. I wanted to explain the difference between the bulbs and the plants. The plants that we have were started earlier this year by seed and were allowed to grow. So this is their first year of growth. The bulbs that you get at most farm supply stores were last year's plants that were planted late and started to bulb slightly, and then they went dormant. So when you plant the bulb, you're starting on year 2 of that onion's life. Okay? So the plants are year 1, and the bulbs, this year's growth will be year 2. Onions are a biennial, which means they will produce flowers in year 2. Okay? Most of the plants, the onions that you grow, that you start from bulbs, will produce a flower stalk. Would everybody agree with that? And you either have to cut it off or deal with it. Okay? The ones that you're doing for plants, I won't say you won't have any that would produce a flower stalk, but I would say that 99% of them will not produce a flower stalk this year. They will concentrate on making the bulb and the plant. Okay, so that's the advantage. The reason why, in my experience, if it produces a stalk, it affects the interior of the onion bulb, and at the very least, it makes the storability of that onion less quality or less long lasting. Okay, so anyway, those are just a few little tidbits. Okay, there's a difference. There's not really a lot of difference between the way you would plant a bulb and the way you would plant the plant. The plants, if you have those in front of you right now and look at it, or you look here, it has just a little bit of white on the end of it, which is going to be the bulb, and then the rest of it is green. You do not want to plant that plant any deeper than about 1 inch into the soil. You need to get it just in the ground enough that the root is secure and just kind of firm the soil up. Don't stomp it, tamp it down, but firm it up so it can, halfway stay upright. Okay? There's a reason for doing that. We'll show you in just a few. The bulb, if you plant the bulbs, you would probably want to plant that bulb about half the height of that bulb, not all the way under. Okay? Interrupt me at any time if you have a question, okay? The folks that we bought the onion plants from this year was Dixondale Farms, which is in Texas. And the variety of onions that you have is called the Texas Legend sweet onion. Texas Legend. The farm is Dixondale Farms. You can look that up on the internet. They've got onion growing guides. They've got videos that tell you all about it and all. So if I mess up and tell you wrong information, find out what they say and go with that. But anyway, what they recommend doing, and I'll probably get ahead of myself on the slides, but you'll be able to see everything on the handout that you will be getting if you don't already have it. They recommend that you start with a raised bed, if you will, not necessarily a raised bed garden like with wood sides, but just an elevated, at least about 4 inches above the surface of the rest of the soil in there. Work it up with a hoe, a shovel, a potato fork, or till it, how you loosen that soil up. And then I would use the laser, but I'm afraid if I hit that, then I'll turn the thing off. So consider this to be the edge of the bed that you're planting in. So you might have a little row, a little over a foot or 2 foot wide, or in a raised bed, it'd be about the same thing. And about 2 inches over from the edge of the bed, you would dig a little trench about, I think this says about 1 inch deep, 1 inch deep, and put that onion there. You don't have to dig a trench, just stick the onion in about 1 inch deep, okay? And then if you're planting them in a row, plant them, this recommends, in the paper it says at least 4 inches apart. But what they did on this one, I think that will work really well, is about 6 inches over from where you plant the first row, dig about a 4 inch deep trench all the way to the length of the row, about 6 inches away from the row where the onion is. Okay? And in that 4 inch deep trench, you put the fertilizer there. And part of that is if you're using chemical fertilizers, they're more likely to burn the plant if you get it too close. Okay? With the organic fertilizer that you're going to be getting through Grow Appalachia, it's not that big of a deal. You can put it right on it and it'll be okay. As a matter of fact, that's what I did. But if you're going to use chemical fertilizer, how many in here use chemical fertilizer? No one wants to confess, right? Okay. Because we know that we try to emphasize organic gardening, right? Okay, but anyway, put the fertilizer in. Onions need to eat to be able to grow. They recommend the fertilizer to have a little bit higher amount of phosphorus. That's the second number in the analysis of the fertilizer. So, if your first one, I think the Grow Appalachia one is at 4. I'm not even sure if it's that on the nitrogen, but it probably doesn't have an extra amount. Find something that provides a little bit of phosphorus. I think bone meal, if you can get that, maybe put that in just a little bit. But just scattering along in that trench. The onions have shallow roots for the most part, but by the time that fertilizer becomes available to the onion, the roots are going to go out at least 6 or 8 inches from the plant itself along the surface. So they're going to be out there feeding off of that fertilizer. Any questions about that? What they did was do that, and then 6 inches over, they did another row. Any questions? Okay, now getting back to what I did last year, I grew my tomatoes in a raised bed, part of them anyway. And I've got 4 foot by 10 foot raised beds. So what I did about this time of the year, I went in and I figured out exactly where that I was going to be putting my tomato plants, because I wanted to intersperse my onions with my tomatoes. And I also did that with my peppers. But like Teresa said, don't plant your tomatoes anytime soon, right? But I staked mine, or kept mine upright, my tomatoes, with concrete reinforcement wire cages. And you can see a little bit of that on there in the picture. So I went in and placed those things into the ground about this time of the year. And then I went, and instead of planting 4 inches apart, I did 6. Because I wanted them to have ample amount of room. And I worked every available spot that was at least 6 inches away from the next onion, all the way on both sides of my 10-foot bed. In that 10-foot bed, I had 7 tomato plants, 4 on one side, 3 on the other side, with the 3 being between the other 2 on the other side, just so airflow, whatever you want me to do on the crowd. So anyway, that was what my tomatoes. That's what my onions looked like last year. I think they did pretty good. Most of them were 4 or 5 inches. I had a few that were bigger than that, which are pretty good onions.
Do you only get 1 onion per plant?
Per plant, yes. But just think that little plant that you plant, if it produces an onion that's 4 or 5 or 6 inches in diameter, that little bundle you got is probably at least 30. Okay, and I'm sure that if you're just, the onion is your favorite plant that you could possibly ever want to grow, we probably have a few extra. I don't know that for a fact, but those bundles were, I think we have a few
How
extra.
long is the harvest time?
Okay, I was going to say that. From the time that you plant these, I just planted mine yesterday, as a matter of fact, this year, a little bit early. I didn't plant all of my onions, but I like to push the envelope a little bit. I've got sugar snap peas that are already up about 1 inch tall at this point. Now, will next week's weather mess with them? Maybe. But what's the worst thing you can do? Replant them, right? But what's the best thing? If they make it, then I've got an earlier crop than I would have if I'd have waited. Okay, so that's one way to look at it. Just experiment. Don't always follow the rules. Sorry.
What type of onion is that?
That's the Texas Legend, same as that we
So
have.
how long can you start harvesting those onions? You're not gonna pull them out the same day.
Same day. Okay, let me show you the next slide. When the onion plant, the top of the plant, after the thing blows, it'll get soft and the top will fold over. Okay, as soon as that top starts to fall over, you need to stop fertilizing. I mean, of course, definitely stop fertilizing. Stop watering if you're watering. Do all that. Let them dry out if you can. But pick those things up out of the ground and put them in a place that's dry and it's got a lot of good airflow. Mine, I harvested most of mine in June. That's when they did this. And I planted them probably about the last part of March last year. So they were mature bulbs by June. About the same time I harvest my garlic, about the same time.
So when are you supposed to plant the onions?
Well, 6 to 8 weeks before the last projected frost. So our last frost generally is around, what do we say, May the 10th? Last year it was May the 10th or the 11th. The year before that it was May the 10th or 11th. Some years it's April, last part of April. I have no idea what it's going to be this year, but about 6 to 8 weeks before. So if we're looking at May the 10th, April the 10th, probably around first part of April. Onions are a little bit hardy. They'll survive some cold temperatures. They'll survive frost. I don't know if they'll survive a freeze like we had in December, but I don't expect that we're going to have another one of those this year. And that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Yeah, from where I live in Pinot, our last frost date is May 1st.
Yeah, they're wrong. That's kind of what I shoot for anyway.
I just looked at Carl's almanac. This year is giving us an extremely early late frost, May 2nd. I don't know about that. I'm going on it.
May 10th, okay.
You know the best way to really find out when it is?
When he gets here.
When it gets here. Wait till it gets here.
I may put a few cool weather stuff out, but not much. Not cabbage, broccoli, some of those things that you grow through the winter anyway, you know.
Right.
Okay, you may get by with that. It's true plants, but seedlings, anything less than 2 to 4 true leaves, I don't think I would.
They're pretty tender. Pretty tender, pretty subject to cold.
Is it better to just use natural soil or something that's been enhanced with sand or with compost or something to make it lighter?
Okay. I just use the natural soil
Okay, so
most
you
of the
don't
time,
have
but I
to
do
do
add
anything
compost. And
special, but,
I do try to loosen it up.
Okay, yeah.
The ones I did in the raised bed, the raised bed mix that I use generally is about one part compost, 1 part peat moss, and 1 part vermiculite, or I always use vermiculite, not perlite, but it'd be about the same kind of thing.
Okay.
So I try to,
Rather light.
right.
Light side. Okay.
But I do grow onions in the garden. If you're going to grow them in the garden, work in some compost, and as you loosen that up, because if it's really compacted, then you're not going to have very good bulb development. Okay. And the trick, I'll back that up a little bit. My onion, I keep saying tomatoes. That's not a tomato. Somebody, if I call it a tomato, somebody tell me that's not a tomato. My onions, if you go out and look at them, they are sitting on top of the ground. Okay? If you want bulbs to develop on your onions, as soon as they start to bulb, start raking the soil away from it. I put a little bit of straw. You can see a light layer of straw. Of course, with the straw, you have seeds in there from the straw that you got to stay on top of really quick. As soon as it starts coming up, just keep that pull it out. It won't take long, especially if you get it while they're young. Pull it out, because the worst thing that you can do in your onion patch is have a lot of weeds, because those weeds will compete for nutrients, the water, and for sunlight, and will mess you up in growing onions. And I think I'm probably talking way too long, but main thing is pull that soil away. A lot of people bury their onions deep because a lot of things works better if it's dug deep. The roots on the onions is all that has to be in the ground. They're shaped so that they can just sit there on top of the ground and be happy. Not very many things are going to eat those things. Rabbits tend to avoid those. Anyway, any more questions about onions?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. What was your fertilizer mixture?
Well, just the people that provided the plants, or we bought the plants from, recommend a fertilizer that's a little higher in the phosphorus, which is the second number in the three. So, but the Grow Appalachia fertilizer is pretty even in all three. That's what I used, and I think they did pretty good. So,
If they used our fertilizer, is there something else they can add just to get that second number up?
that's why I was thinking some bone meal or something like that would probably work.
So if you're using we're gonna give you fertilizer, if you use that, and you're wanting to add something, some bone meal, blood meal, something like that, to raise that,
Right.
that would be
So
better.
onions need a lot of nitrogen too, so they need that. One thing that I did last year, and I did again this year, I bought organic alfalfa pellets at Tractor Supply, a 50-pound bag of them, and just scattered those around where my onions are planted. And as soon as it rains, it'll start dissolving that pellet, and that provides some nutrients as well. I don't know if you really need to do that, but I figure the more food you put to them, the more food they'll put to you. How's that sound?
You must not have any horses in the area.
Well, they can't get into my garden. Well, they haven't gotten into my garden.
I'll see.
Yeah.
So if you're not interested,
Plan on close.
better go with the bulb instead of the,
It doesn't really matter. Whichever is cheaper.
yeah.
Plant them close together. If you're not wanting bulbs, you get lots and lots of green onions. Thank you. Should have mentioned that. A lot of people like green onions a whole lot better than they do the bulb onions.
So when can you plant peas if you decide you want to plant peas?
How about you ask me that next month? And it won't be too late to plant them then, and I'll let you know if it worked this early. Linda, when do you plant peas?
I took the gun planning last week.
Okay.
I had classes.
Okay. So later on, before fall planting of cool season crops get here, we're going to talk to you about few simple things you can do to extend your growing season through the winter and into the next year, like I was talking about earlier. Okay. Let's talk about potatoes real quick. There's some potatoes in an egg carton. They're pretty expensive, aren't they? Okay, potatoes, Irish potatoes are regular potatoes. We're not talking about sweet potatoes, that's a different animal, so to speak. Potatoes are tubers, which are actually they're a stem instead of a root. Okay, so the things we eat as potatoes are not roots, they are underground stems. The eyes on the potatoes is the nose on the stem, and that's where the eyes are, where it buds and produces the plant. It grows from those. So when you get your potatoes, there's a lot of different kinds of potatoes you can get. If you're going to get them, if you get a voucher to do that, I don't know if you have an opportunity to pick whatever they offer there. I'm assuming that they do. Teresa would probably know. But anyway, the most common ones that people get and grow around here are what? Kennebecks, Yukon Golds, Pontiac Red, and there's a few others. It's recommended that you get certified seed potatoes. Does anybody know why? To protect against disease. It's not just the greed of the companies that produce them, but it is for disease, protection against disease. Okay, if you save your own potatoes year after year, unless you know what you're doing, you're likely to start out on a bad foot by planting a diseased potato. So a certified potato is good to do. Buying potatoes in a grocery store to plant seems like it might be a good idea, but they're generally sprayed with a sprout inhibitor. They do occasionally sprout, but they are sprayed with an inhibitor to keep that from happening, because people, when you buy potatoes, don't want to buy some that are sprouted because quality deteriorates. Anyway, once you get the seed potatoes, I would recommend about a couple of 3 weeks before that you're going to plant these things, put them out where they can get, where they're good and warm, even where they can get some sunlight. And they'll start breaking, it's called chitting, C-H-I-T-T-I-N-G. Chitting potatoes. Those are called chits on there when they start producing that. Now be careful saying that. So anyway, you want them to start. Why? Because if they don't start doing that until they're already in the ground, it may take a little while longer. They produce the sprouts better when it's warmer and got light. Okay. So once you do that, then you cut the potatoes. How do you know how to cut them? Well, if they're about the size of a golf ball, you don't want to cut them. But if they're larger, like a regular sized potato, cut those things so that you have at least 2 of the eyes with the buds on each part of that potato. Probably a half, cutting it in half is the best way to do it. I know a lot of people that just, once you cut them, you just go and plant them. But they recommend curing that potato for a few days before you do it. And by doing that, you would just keep them in a dry place and with the exposed interior of the potato exposed to the light, and it'll kind of heal over. And that'll keep it from developing fungus, taking it over, all that once you put it in the ground. How many plant without doing that? Let me see your hand.
I have, but I didn't know that.
Okay, well, we'll forgive you this time. I've done it both ways. Both ways work. This tends to be the better way to do it. And it gives you more stuff to look forward to, right? Okay. Now I've got about 2 or 3 pictures of trenching. Does everybody know what hilling is? If you're planting potatoes, everybody knows about hilling. Hilling your potato, not healing, H-E-A-L, but hilling, H-I-L-L, producing a mound of dirt up over them. Okay. Why is that important? Get more potatoes. Okay, but soil prep is about the same. You need to have good loose soil. Work some compost into that. Till it, if you're going to till it. I use like a broad fork or a potato fork just to kind of work the compost into the soil. But once you get it worked up that it's kind of loose and nice, then you go through and dig a trench that's probably about 8 inches deep or something like that. And different people have different ideas on what to do, but a lot of people put the fertilizer in the bottom of that trench and then put a little bit of soil back over top of the fertilizer. How many do that? Okay. Some people put the fertilizer between the potatoes, which need to be planted about 12 inches apart, at least. Can you plant them closer? Sure. But why would you? Okay, you don't want to crowd them. You want to have them to have ample room so they can produce as many potatoes as they can. So, anyway, put your fertilizer in the trench, put a little soil in, or at least put it between the potatoes. And again, that has to do with the chemical fertilizer. The organic fertilizer, if it comes into contact with the potato, is not going to hurt it. Okay. Put about 3 or 4 inches of soil on top of that, which means once you do that, it'll still have a trench, a visible trench. Once that potato sprouts and starts producing the plant above the soil, let it grow. I'm pointing at Linda, I know she does a really good job with her potatoes. How much do you let it grow before you put more soil on top of it?
I usually watch the top of it, and whenever when the top leaves are kind of like weird, 4 inches, 6 inches, so then I got some space to build the soil up around it.
Right.
And then I just put that soil all the way around the stems, spread compost.
Right, just a little bit of the top sticking out, right?
Yeah, just leave it sticking out,
okay? And you keep doing that. Once it gets up 5, 6, 7 more inches of growth, put more soil up and work it till eventually you've got it 6 or 7 inches or so above ground level, okay? Again, it's an underground stem, so it's going to, if more of that stem is exposed or has the ability to be underground, it'll produce more potatoes that way. And that's just, you know, it's not unlimited as to how many it'll produce, but it will help if you heal them up. But you don't want to heal them up all at the same time at the beginning. Just put enough soil over it so it can sprout and grow above the soil, and then heal it over, you know, a few weeks. Any questions? Any questions about the? Those don't look very big.
How do you do that, where you're bringing the soil up? I mean,
Well,
just keep on going?
You can keep on going, but once they start flowering,
Yeah,
don't heal them anymore
okay.
at that point.
How many potatoes you get each time you plant? Whatever you do. It's not like peanuts, huh? Peanuts keep growing.
Yeah, it's pretty much a determined amount of potatoes that you're going to eventually get. I don't know. I mean, I can get a gallon bucket full of potatoes out of some plants, and some I don't get as much. So any estimates for people who raise a lot of potatoes? I just grow a few. My last year potato crop was a bust because for the first time the deer decided they wanted to eat. I was out of town and they found my potatoes and they ate them down to the ground.
What about moles? I had moles to eat a lot of time.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of stuff that likes to eat things, so if you can keep them away, it's good. Usually, I've never had problems with deer or rabbits or something, at least other than just taking a bite or two out of something. But last year they decimated my sweet potatoes, my regular potatoes, and the crows got my corn. So I had a good year. But anyway, this is the harvest I did today out of my cattle mineral tub, just enough to put in some salads. Those were about, they might not look like it, they're about 5 inches. Last year, about this time, they were quite a bit longer than that, but they're still growing. The interesting thing about a lot of those things in the fall, and we'll talk about that again later, is once things go through cold weather in the fall and winter, go through a frost or two, carrots especially, are so much sweeter after they've gone through frost than they were before, because the, what's that? Kale, beets, cabbage, even, okay? Why is that? Well, the sugars that they produce is for the purpose of antifreeze, if you will. And I like that kind of antifreeze, the sugars. Okay, that's my cabbage. That's a little bit of lettuce. That wasn't anywhere near all that I got today. That's what my lettuce bed looks like, having gone through that severe freeze last December. And I got little wire hoops that I just bend around and stick in the ground on these. I've got another thing where I take metal conduit pipe and actually have a 4-foot wide thing that's about that tall that I put a row cover over, and that usually does really well. The row cover I've got there is nowhere as thick as, I mean, I didn't feel very much like that it was going to protect my plants in there as well as I wanted it to, but they survived all through the winter with a really lightweight row cover.
And I've done 2 different ways with my raised beds. One, I've used plumber's tape, if you know what that is, that metal, and attached it, and actually my cousin did, he's a really great guy. He attached it to the frame of my raised bed, and then I just took the glass water pipe hose and hooked it in. And I've also used rebar and cut it, and because I might have, I'm wrong size the first time. But if you do the right size, you can just bend it and stop it down, or stick it down on the stop, and put your rope over or plastic over. I've done both of those.
And if you use too small of a plastic pipe, like the first time I did, I used PEX.
Yeah,
And it was a smaller one, and I just bent it over, and it was great until it snowed,
until it's not.
and then it just didn't do so well. That's why I ended up making the metal conduit, and bought a pipe bender that I use, and I put it every 4 foot, and I could, I use rebar at the end of the row, so a lot of times I have a 40-foot row on my raised bed row that has the row cover along the whole length of it. That's how that I had cabbage and all that stuff last year.
Yeah, and I love growing carrots in the way. I do that, and I'm usually planting carrots in April when everybody else is planting. Not a whole lot, just a little bit.
Hopefully I didn't talk too long and bore you, but appreciate everybody's comments. Is there any other questions? Okay.
A lot of knowledge right there. If you've got a question, ask it.
You ever use the rooting hormone that you use for like transplants on potatoes?
I have not.
Quicker start?
I have not. I don't know that you really need to on something like that, because
I did not get it.
they are,
Accelerated like it does a lot of other things.
yeah, and it may very well do it. Did everybody hear his question?
Yeah, can you turn all this stuff back in, stuff you haven't harvested? Can you turn it over the next year?
Probably not. A lot of things are going to go to seed and all that, so you're talking about what I'll do, like on my lettuce beds, I'll go in there and I'll take all that stuff out before too long, but not before I get other lettuce started somewhere else. And I do try to rotate everything that I do in different parts of my garden, just mainly for pest control and for nutrient.
What do you think about planting onions in the garden?
I have never tried that.
Because I'm wondering if, garden is already up, have space between two farms. Jack your onion plants and then harvest another.
I would try it. Definitely, it will need increase in the amount of nutrients that it has available to it, so try it. I mean, I don't know why it wouldn't work. I usually plant my garlic so close together. In 2 raised beds that I've got that are 4 by 10, I've got 320 garlic plants growing, so I don't have room to do that between mine. But, again, I'm pushing the envelope on what I'm doing.
Is that it?
So that's all I'm gonna say.
All right, well, we thank you, Doug, we thank you, Anna.